LeBron James is a Philadelphia 76er. Not Cleveland, not Miami, not Golden State. Philadelphia. After weeks of speculation, meetings, pitches, and endless debate, LeBron James chose the 76ers for what may be the final chapter of the most influential career modern basketball has ever seen. Rich Paul announced the move as a 2-year deal, ending one of the most closely watched free agency periods in NBA history. And almost immediately, everyone started asking the same question. Why Philadelphia? Why leave Los Angeles? Why not return home to Cleveland? Why not reunite with Miami? Why not chase history somewhere else? Those are good questions, but I don't think they're the most interesting ones. Because this story isn't really about Philadelphia. It's about something much bigger. For more than 20 years, LeBron James has done something almost no athlete has ever accomplished. He hasn't simply played one of the greatest careers in sports history, he's written it. Every major decision, every team, every chapter has reshaped how we understand the one before it. And now, with what could be the final major decision of his career, one question remains. Did LeBron choose Philadelphia because it gives him the best chance to win? Or because it's the ending he wants history to remember? Because maybe this was never a free agency story. Maybe it was always a story about authorship, about legacy, about control, and about the one opponent every athlete eventually faces: time. I'm Alex, and this is Beyond the Box Score. If you're under 30 years old, it's difficult to remember an NBA where superstars didn't control their own futures. Today, players request trades, sign shorter contracts, recruit teammates, influence front offices, shape championship windows. In many ways, that feels normal. But for decades, it wasn't. Franchises held the power. Players were expected to stay where they were drafted. Loyalty wasn't just admired, it was expected. Changing teams, especially as a superstar, could permanently change how fans saw you. Then came the summer of 2010. LeBron James was already one of the best players in basketball. He had won MVP awards, filled arenas, turned the Cleveland Cavaliers into contenders. But one thing was still missing: a championship. When his contract expired, the entire sports world waited to see what he would do next. What happened became one of the defining moments in modern sports. "I'm going to take my talents to South Beach." Those 7 words did more than announce a new team. They announced a new era. Millions watched, some celebrated, many were furious. Jerseys burned in Cleveland. National television debated whether LeBron had betrayed his hometown. Former players questioned the spectacle. For years, the decision was remembered as a public relations disaster. But with the benefit of time, something else becomes clear. LeBron wasn't simply choosing a team. He was claiming ownership over his career in a way few athletes ever had. For better or worse, he refused to let a franchise decide his future. Instead, he decided it himself. That distinction changed professional basketball forever. Today, the league's biggest stars exercise a level of influence that once seemed impossible. Free agency is no longer just about contracts, it is about leverage, timing, and organizational direction. Whether or not LeBron invented player empowerment, he undeniably accelerated it and became its defining face. Of course, control comes with consequences. When LeBron joined Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh in Miami, expectations became almost impossible to satisfy. Winning wasn't enough anymore. He had to justify the choice. Every championship, every loss, every interview was viewed through one question: was it worth leaving Cleveland? For most athletes, championships answer questions. For LeBron, they created new ones. And without realizing it, he had begun writing the first chapter of a much larger story. Not the story of a basketball player, the story of an athlete determined to become the author of his own legacy. Winning in Miami changed LeBron James, but it didn't change the conversation. He won his first championship in 2012, then another in 2013. On the court, there was very little left to prove. He had become the player everyone expected when he entered the league straight out of high school. Dominant, complete, a champion. Yet something interesting happened. the criticism didn't disappear. For many fans, the question was no longer whether LeBron could win. It became whether the way he chose to win mattered. Some believed joining forces with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh made the path easier. Others argued that history had always been filled with great teams, and that LeBron was simply exercising a freedom previous generations rarely had. Neither side ever completely convinced the other. And that's important, because it taught LeBron something that would shape every major decision that followed. Greatness isn't judged only by accomplishments, it's judged by context. History doesn't simply ask, "What did you do?" It asks, "How did you do it?" That may sound unfair, but it's true of almost every legendary athlete. Michael Jordan is remembered not only for 6 championships, but for never losing an NBA Finals. Tom Brady isn't remembered only for 7 Super Bowls, but for leaving New England and winning somewhere else. Lionel Messi's World Cup changed the way an extraordinary career was remembered. The final chapters don't replace everything that came before, but they often become the lens through which everything else is viewed. LeBron understood that. Whether consciously or instinctively, he stopped thinking about basketball decisions as isolated moments. He began thinking in chapters. Every move had to answer the criticism that came before it. Every success had to build on the last one. Every chapter needed to move the story forward. Then, in the summer of 2014, he made perhaps the most emotionally significant decision of his career. He went home. On paper, it looked like another free agency move, another contract, another jersey, but emotionally, it was something entirely different. For 4 years, Cleveland had lived with the memory of the decision, the burned jerseys, the anger, the feeling of abandonment. LeBron could have stayed away forever. Instead, he walked back into the city that had once rejected him. That decision carried enormous risk. If he failed, the criticism would become permanent. If he succeeded, he had the chance to rewrite one of the most controversial stories in modern sports. That's an extraordinary thing when you think about it. Most people never get the opportunity to rewrite the defining chapter of their lives. LeBron did, and he chose to take it. 2 years later, the opportunity arrived. The 2016 NBA Finals. Cleveland Cavaliers, Golden State Warriors, a team that had won a record 73 games, a 3-1 deficit. By now, the details have become basketball folklore. Kyrie Irving's three-pointer, Kevin Love's defensive stop, and perhaps the most iconic defensive play of the 21st century, LeBron chasing down Andre Iguodala, simply known now as the block. We remember that play because it was spectacular. But its importance goes beyond basketball. In a single sequence, it became a metaphor for LeBron's entire career. Relentless effort, refusal to surrender, belief that no moment was beyond saving. When Cleveland completed the comeback and won its first NBA championship, something remarkable happened. The city celebrated a title. LeBron accomplished something else. He transformed the meaning of his own story. Suddenly, leaving Cleveland wasn't just an act of ambition, it became part of a larger journey. Leave, learn, grow, return, deliver. Whether you agreed with every decision or not, the narrative had changed. LeBron wasn't simply collecting championships anymore. He was constructing a legacy. And that's an important distinction. Championships are measured in banners. Legacy is measured in meaning. By 2016, LeBron had done something very few athletes ever accomplish. He had changed not only what people remembered, but what those memories meant. For many players, that would have been the perfect ending. The hometown hero returns, wins the impossible championship, delivers on a promise, walks away a legend. It feels complete, almost cinematic. But LeBron James has never been content with the obvious ending. Because while the basketball world was celebrating the completion of one story, LeBron was already beginning to think about the next one. The next chapter wouldn't begin in Cleveland. It would begin nearly 2,400 miles away, in a city where basketball was only part of the opportunity, a city where championships shared the stage with movies, business, global branding, and influence. Los Angeles wasn't just another destination, it was an entirely different ambition, and it would test an entirely different version of LeBron James. When LeBron James signed with the Los Angeles Lakers in the summer of 2018, the basketball world reacted with excitement. But the reaction felt different than it had 8 years earlier. There was debate, there was skepticism, there were questions, but there wasn't outrage. The conversation had evolved, and so had LeBron. Miami had been about proving he could become a champion. Cleveland had been about proving he could come home and fulfill a promise. Los Angeles? That was about proving that the biggest athlete in basketball could become something even larger than basketball itself. The Lakers represented more than one of the NBA's most iconic franchises. They represented Hollywood, global visibility, entertainment, business, influence. For some observers, the move made perfect sense. LeBron was entering a different stage of his life. His production company was growing. His business interests were expanding. His family was reaching a point where stability mattered. Los Angeles seemed like the natural intersection of basketball and everything that came after it. For others, the move raised uncomfortable questions. Was winning still the priority? Or had basketball become one piece of a much larger empire? It's a fascinating question because it reveals something about how we view greatness. We often expect legendary athletes to be singularly obsessed, to sacrifice everything for one more championship, to define themselves only by what happens inside the arena. LeBron challenged that expectation. He never asked people to separate the athlete from the businessman, or the father, or the producer, or the philanthropist. He embraced all of those identities at the same time. That made him harder to categorize, but it also made him one of the most influential athletes of his generation. His first season in Los Angeles didn't go according to plan. An injury interrupted the year. The Lakers missed the playoffs. For the first time in nearly a decade, basketball seemed to move on without LeBron deep into the postseason. The criticism returned almost immediately. Maybe the move had been about Hollywood. Maybe the championship window had closed. Maybe age had finally caught him. Those opinions sounded familiar. Because nearly every time LeBron had reached a crossroads, the basketball world had been eager to declare that the best part of his story was over. Then came 2020. No one could have predicted what that season would become. A global pandemic brought sports to a halt. The NBA paused. When it returned, it did so inside an isolated campus in Orlando. No packed arenas, no home court advantage, no cross-country travel, just basketball. Some people have spent years arguing about what the bubble championship should mean. Was it harder? Was it easier? Did the unusual conditions change its value? Reasonable people can disagree. What isn't open to debate is the outcome. The Lakers won the championship. LeBron was named Finals MVP, and once again, he had answered the doubts in the only way elite athletes ultimately can, by winning. 3 franchises, 4 championships, 4 Finals MVPs. The details were different. The pattern was becoming familiar. Every time people believed they understood the final shape of LeBron's career, he expanded it. Then came another milestone that seemed almost unimaginable when he entered the league as an 18-year-old. On February 7, 2023, LeBron James became the NBA's all-time leading scorer. Think about what that record represented. Not simply extraordinary talent, extraordinary endurance. Basketball has always celebrated greatness, but greatness is usually measured in moments. A legendary playoff series, an unforgettable finals performance, a championship-clinching shot. LeBron added another measurement: consistency. Night after night, season after season, year after year. He transformed longevity from something athletes hoped for into something they could aspire to. The scoring record wasn't just a statistical achievement. It was evidence that the traditional timeline for athletic greatness might not be as fixed as everyone once believed. Then came another moment that felt almost impossible just a few years earlier. Bronny James reached the NBA. For decades, fans had imagined the possibility. Could one of the greatest players in basketball history remain in the league long enough to share the court with his own son? It sounded more like a fantasy than a realistic goal, until it happened. Whatever your opinion of the circumstances, the image itself carried enormous emotional weight. A father, a son, 2 generations, 1 NBA floor. It was something basketball had never seen before, and it completed another chapter that LeBron himself had spoken about for years. He had chased championships. He had chased records. Now he had experienced something no championship could provide: the opportunity to share the game that defined his life with his own child. If this were simply a biography, that might be where we would end. The championships, the records, the business success, the scoring title, playing alongside Bronny. It feels complete. But biographies and documentaries aren't the same thing. A biography tells you what happened. A documentary asks what it meant. Because while LeBron was adding milestones to an already extraordinary career, something else was happening. Quietly, gradually, almost imperceptibly. The NBA itself was changing. A new generation wasn't waiting for permission, it was taking over. Nikola Jokic had become the standard for basketball intelligence. Giannis Antetokounmpo had redefined modern dominance. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had emerged as one of the league's elite guards. Anthony Edwards represented the confidence of the next generation. And Luka Doncic had become the centerpiece of the Los Angeles Lakers' future. That's the part of this story that makes it so compelling. LeBron wasn't declining into irrelevance. He was still producing at a remarkably high level, still capable of changing games, still capable of helping a championship contender. But for the first time in his career, the league wasn't waiting for him to define its future. It was building one around a new generation. That's not failure, that's time. And time has a way of changing even the greatest stories, because eventually, every legend reaches the same question: not whether they can still play, but whether they can still decide what comes next. And that's exactly where LeBron found himself. Not at the end of greatness, but at the beginning of its final chapter. There is a moment in every extraordinary career when the questions become more interesting than the achievements. For LeBron James, that moment didn't arrive because he stopped playing at an elite level. It arrived because, for the first time, there wasn't an obvious next step. Throughout his career, each major decision had answered a specific need. Miami answered the question of championships. Cleveland answered the question of redemption. Los Angeles answered the question of life beyond basketball. Philadelphia was different, because this decision wasn't solving an old problem, it was defining the last one. When LeBron entered free agency, the basketball world immediately did what it always does. Fans built imaginary lineups. Television panels debated championship odds. Social media turned every rumor into breaking news. The conversation became a game of destinations. Cleveland, Miami, Golden State, Philadelphia. Every logo carried a different promise. But underneath all of that speculation was a much more interesting reality. This wasn't really about geography, it was about identity. Every destination represented a different version of LeBron James. Return to Cleveland, and the story becomes one of coming home twice, a poetic ending. The hometown hero who never truly left. Go back to Miami, and the narrative becomes a return to the place where championships transformed potential into certainty. Join another established contender, and people would say the competitor never stopped chasing one more banner. Each choice made sense. Each choice also came with a cost. That's the part we often overlook when discussing athletes at this level. Greatness doesn't eliminate difficult decisions, it makes them more complicated, because every choice becomes permanent. There are no more opportunities to reinvent the story after this. No fourth act, no unexpected sequel. This chapter will inevitably influence how the entire career is remembered. Think about how we remember other legends. When we think about Michael Jordan, it's impossible not to picture the final shot against Utah. Even though he returned with Washington years later, that's not the image history chose to preserve. When we think about Kobe Bryant, many of us remember 60 points in his final game. Not because it was his greatest performance, because it felt like the perfect farewell. Sports have a remarkable way of compressing decades into a handful of defining images. That's what LeBron is navigating now. Not just another season, another image, another memory, another chapter that may eventually become the one people mention first. It's easy to assume that the pressure comes from fans or the media. I'm not sure that's true. The greatest pressure may come from understanding exactly what this moment represents. Imagine spending more than 20 years building something extraordinary, and knowing that the final decisions might shape how future generations interpret everything that came before. That's a burden very few people ever experience. LeBron does, and that's why this free agency was never ordinary. It wasn't simply about finding a roster that fit, it was about finding a story that fit. Because basketball isn't played in a vacuum. Every franchise has its own identity, its own expectations, its own history. When a player of LeBron's stature joins a team, he doesn't just become part of its story, the team's story becomes part of his. Philadelphia understands that better than almost any city in sports. This is a city that embraces resilience. It celebrates effort. It respects players who compete through adversity. Philadelphia fans have never demanded perfection. They've demanded commitment. They want to believe that the player wearing their uniform wants to win as badly as they do. It's an environment that can be unforgiving, but it can also be fiercely loyal. And perhaps that's what makes this choice so fascinating. LeBron didn't choose the easiest market. He didn't choose the safest narrative. He chose a city where every game carries emotional weight, where expectations aren't inherited, they're earned. Basketball-wise, the decision also makes sense. Philadelphia offers a roster capable of competing immediately. It gives LeBron another legitimate opportunity to chase a championship without asking him to carry an impossible burden every single night. At this stage of his career, that's an important distinction. He's no longer trying to prove he can be the entire system. He's trying to prove that experience, intelligence, and leadership can still elevate one. That's a different challenge, and maybe a more interesting one, because if LeBron wins another championship in Philadelphia, it won't simply add another ring to an already extraordinary resume. It will reinforce something that has defined his entire career: adaptability, different teammates, different coaches, different systems, different cities, different expectations. The constants have never been the circumstances. The constant has been LeBron. And yet, there is another possibility we shouldn't ignore. What if Philadelphia isn't primarily about adding another championship? What if it's about refusing to drift quietly toward retirement? Athletes often talk about wanting to leave the game on their own terms. That's easier to say than to do. In reality, many careers end because the decision is made for them. Performance declines, the phone stops ringing, the opportunities disappear. LeBron has spent more than 2 decades resisting that reality. This decision feels consistent with that pattern, not because it guarantees success, nothing can guarantee that, but because it demonstrates something that has defined his entire career: intentionality. Very little about LeBron James's career has happened by accident, whether you agreed with his choices or questioned them. They were almost always deliberate, and perhaps that's the most revealing part of all. Philadelphia isn't simply the next destination. It's the latest expression of a philosophy that has guided him since 2010. If you're going to be judged by history, don't let history make your choices for you. Make them yourself, and live with the consequences. Because that's what authors do. They don't control how readers interpret the ending, but they do choose how the story is written. And LeBron James has been writing his own story for longer than almost any athlete ever has. Every great story reaches a moment where the audience thinks they know how it ends. Curious? This isn't that moment, because if LeBron James wanted the safest ending to his career, he had easier options. He could have stayed in Los Angeles. He could have returned to Cleveland and embraced the nostalgia. He could have chosen a situation with fewer questions and fewer expectations. Instead, he chose Philadelphia. That choice says something. Not because Philadelphia guarantees another championship. Nothing in today's NBA guarantees that. It says something because of what Philadelphia represents. This is a franchise still searching for its next defining moment. A city that has experienced heartbreak almost as often as hope. Fans who celebrate effort as much as achievement. And a basketball culture that demands accountability every single night. Thoughtful. For a player who has spent 20-plus years under the brightest spotlight in sports, that challenge wasn't something to avoid. It was something to embrace. That's been one of the constants throughout LeBron's career. He has rarely chosen comfort. He has chosen significance. Think back through every major decision. Leaving Cleveland in 2010 wasn't comfortable. Returning in 2014 wasn't comfortable. Joining the Lakers while they were rebuilding wasn't comfortable. None of those decisions came with certainty. Each required betting on a future that hadn't happened yet. Philadelphia feels remarkably similar. It's another wager. Another belief that one more chapter can redefine everything that came before it. But this time the stakes are different. This isn't about proving he's the best player in the world. He's already done that. It isn't about validating a championship resume. 4 NBA titles and 4 Finals MVP awards have already secured his place among basketball's immortals. This is about something much more difficult. Can greatness still evolve after everyone believes the story is already finished? That's an extraordinarily rare challenge. Most athletes spend their final seasons trying to preserve what they've built. LeBron has spent his trying to add something new. Whether it's becoming the all-time leading scorer, playing alongside his son, or now beginning a new chapter in Philadelphia. He continues to resist the idea that legacy is something frozen in time. Instead, he treats it as something still under construction. And that's a fascinating way to think about greatness, because perhaps legacy isn't built in one defining moment. Perhaps it's built through a lifetime of choosing what comes next. Philadelphia now becomes part of that legacy. If the 76ers win a championship, this move will be remembered as another masterstroke in a career full of bold decisions. If they fall short, critics will undoubtedly question whether one final move was necessary. But that's the risk every meaningful decision carries. You don't get certainty. You get the opportunity to write another chapter. And perhaps that's what has separated LeBron from so many of his contemporaries. He has never seemed afraid of the possibility that history might judge him. He's been willing to give history something to judge. That's a subtle difference, but it's an important one, because the athletes we remember aren't always the ones who avoided mistakes. They're often the ones who made bold choices knowing exactly how much they had to lose. For more than 2 decades, LeBron James has done exactly that. Sometimes the choices worked, sometimes they were controversial. Almost all of them changed the conversation. Philadelphia is no different. The uniform has changed. The city has changed. The expectations have changed. But the question has remained remarkably consistent. What kind of story is LeBron James trying to tell? The answer may not come this season. It may not even come when he retires. It will come years from now when history decides which moments mattered most. And that's the strange thing about legacy. You spend a lifetime creating it. Then you spend the rest of time watching other people interpret it. When LeBron James was drafted first overall in 2003, the expectations were almost impossible to comprehend. Thoughtful. He wasn't simply expected to become an NBA star. He was expected to become the player of his generation. For most athletes, expectations like that become a burden. For LeBron, they became the beginning of a story that has stretched across more than 2 decades, a story measured in championships, in MVP awards, in Olympic gold medals, in scoring records, in unforgettable performances. But if we've learned anything from following LeBron's career, it's this. The numbers were never the whole story, because every statistic came attached to a decision. Every championship came attached to a choice. Every milestone came attached to a new question. Curious, should he have left Cleveland? Could Miami's titles ever silence the critics? Would returning home redeem him? Did Los Angeles mean basketball was no longer the priority? And now, intrigued. Why Philadelphia? Those questions have followed him because LeBron James has never allowed his career to unfold quietly. He has challenged traditions. He has embraced criticism. He has accepted risks that many athletes would have avoided, not because he knew every decision would succeed, but because he believed his career should be one he actively shaped. Whether you admire every choice or disagree with many of them, it's difficult to deny the result. Few athletes in modern history have exercised this much influence over both their sport and their own narrative. The NBA of today is different from the NBA LeBron entered. Player empowerment has grown. Free agency carries greater significance. Stars think differently about contracts, careers, and control. LeBron didn't create every one of those changes, but he became the face of them. And perhaps that's why Philadelphia matters, not because it's guaranteed to deliver another championship, not because it suddenly changes where LeBron ranks among basketball's all-time greats. Those debates will continue long after his career is over. Philadelphia matters because it reminds us that, even after 20-plus years, LeBron is still making decisions instead of having decisions made for him. There's something deeply human about that. We all reach moments when circumstances begin to narrow our options. Age changes us, careers change us, life changes us. The choices become fewer, the uncertainty grows, the future becomes shorter than the past, yet we still hope to leave something behind that reflects who we really were. Maybe that's why LeBron's story resonates beyond basketball. It's not just the story of an extraordinary athlete. It's the story of someone trying to remain the author of his own life, even as time becomes the one opponent no one can defeat. Will Philadelphia become the perfect ending? No one knows. Maybe it ends with another championship parade through the streets of Philadelphia. Maybe it ends with a hard-fought playoff run that falls just short. Maybe it ends quietly, with no storybook finish at all. History doesn't promise perfect endings. It only promises that eventually every story reaches one. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question all along. The question isn't whether Philadelphia will define LeBron's legacy. The question is whether this final decision reveals what his legacy has always been. Not just greatness, not just longevity, not just championships, choice. The willingness to take ownership of the story, even when the ending is uncertain. Maybe that's why this move feels so fitting. Because from the decision in 2010 to this final chapter in Philadelphia, one idea has remained remarkably consistent. LeBron James has never waited for history to write his story. He's picked up the pen himself. And now, with one final chapter still unfolding, the rest of us are left to read it. I'm Alex, and this has been Beyond the Box Score. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines and explore the story behind the game. Like the video, share it with another sports fan, and let us know in the comments. Was Philadelphia the perfect final chapter for LeBron James, or would you have written a different ending? Until next time, I'll see you beyond the box score.